Hey everyone, welcome to Reddit Readout. Today we are checking out Malicious Compliance. Story 1. Transfer me to anyone else, whatever you say ma'am. During the summer of 2020 I worked customer service for an online retailer. It is the worst job I've ever worked. While most people were polite, kind, and understanding, I had to deal with many people who were, often justifiably, upset about a problem with their order. But even then most people would be sure to say their anger was not directed towards me. Faking sympathy for these people was hard enough, but then there would be people berating me personally as if I had something to do with whatever problem they were complaining about. One day, the system we used to track people's orders was down. I wouldn't be able to cancel orders, check when the shipping date was, change the shipping address, nothing. The supervisor told us to tell the customers to call back in an hour, at which point the system would hopefully be back up. Again, most people were understanding that there was literally nothing I could do to modify their orders and said they would call back later. This one lady calls me and is upset about something and wants me to cancel her order. I tell her I apologize for the inconvenience but I can't at the moment, and that she should call back in an hour. She was not happy with the response. She starts going off about how that is unacceptable, she doesn't have time later, take down her information and do it later once the system is back up, this is horrible customer service, etc. I constantly have calls coming in so I can't be dealing with her problem at the same time as speaking to another customer, and more importantly, my shift was going to be finished in 20 minutes and I sure as hell wasn't waiting around for the system to be back up and doing overtime to cancel this lady's order, especially with her rude, entitled attitude. Eventually, she decides that she has had enough of me, and asks to speak with my supervisor. Summer of 2020 is peak COVID, so I was working from home. I explain the situation and say I can't just pass the phone to my supervisor, but what I can do is escalate the issue by putting in a ticket and a supervisor will call them back in 24 to 48 hours. Of course this is not good enough for her. She is yelling at me at this point, going on and on about how awful this customer service is, and she is not accepting that there is nothing I can do at the moment. She decides she doesn't want to speak to me anymore and screeches at me to just transfer me to anyone else. I don't care. I don't want to speak to you anymore. I say okay, just give me a moment. As I'm thinking in my head you did say anyone, I transfer her to the Spanish customer service line. TLDR, customer service job, system to modify/cancel orders was down. Lady didn't like that, got frustrated and asked to speak with anyone else. I transferred her to the Spanish customer service line. Story 2. CFO changes the cycle count policy, chaos ensues. I used to work for a major food packing company. There is a good chance you have one of their products in your cupboards or fridge. This particular MC was not performed by myself, but I had a front row seat and even felt some of the pain from the result. My job was purchasing for production, which was all of the ingredients to make the product. Another purchaser was in charge of packaging, jars, mostly, along with labels and shipping boxes. Then there was the warehouse who are responsible for everything that enters or leaves the facility. These three positions are the only ones required to do cycle counts. Debbie in accounting isn't counting reams of paper and boxes of paper clips, which were generated by accounting and sent to us 2 days before they are due. We all fell under the CFO, and because we all dealt with items that generated profits/loss, we had to do weekly, monthly, and annual cycle counts. Mine were fairly easy, 6 items per week, 15 per month, and everything annually. I'm fairly sure it was similar for packaging as well. And for mine, most of my stuff was fresh ingredients, so it would already be in production, so I had nothing to count. The warehouse, on the other hand, had a much more simplified schedule, nothing weekly or monthly, 3 items per quarter, and half of the inventory annually. They would also get their inventory lists 2 to 3 weeks before the due date. This was all intentional because the amount that they had to count was insane and it would be lucky if they had 2 people at a time to count. One single item could take a week on its own because of the sheer volume and the fact that product was coming and going constantly. I felt bad for them. We each get a meeting invite from the CFO to discuss the cycle counts and go when the day arrives. CFO explains that they have noticed a loss trend occurring, so they wanted us to increase our cycle counts. For me in packaging, everything basically doubled, weekly and monthly doubled. We now had a semi-annual half inventory count, and annually remained the same. It sucked, but was manageable. Then the warehouse was politely ordered to sit on a rusty knife. Still no weekly counts, but now had monthly with 5 items, quarterly doubled, added semi-annually with 10 items, and annual was bumped up to 75% of inventory. I looked over at the warehouse guy, Ty, and he just bowed his head. The CFO is a very intelligent and nice guy, but he is all about the analytics of numbers and not the human element. CFO, any questions? Ty, trying to gather his thoughts, this is, a lot. CFO, I'm aware it is an increase, but this is the best way to get the data we need to figure out where the losses are occurring and take action. Ty, are you going to hire anybody else for the warehouse to help? CFO, we do not have any plans to. Ty, can we get a scanner or something? This is going to take a significant amount of time to complete and will cause issues. CFO, let's go by this new plan, and we will re-evaluate in a few months. Ty had a defeated look and just said, okay. My next couple of counts took me a little longer, but nothing I couldn't handle. Then came the week of our first monthly with the new rules, and I was missing a pretty significant amount of a couple of items and found they should have been delivered that week, confirmed by the company I ordered from. I went to talk to Ty and found him deep in the warehouse, where he shouldn't need to be as he mostly scheduled trucking to distributors, and on a pile of product trying to count thousands of boxes before the deadline. He was sweating like crazy, and after I explained my issue he explained they were behind on incoming packages and it could be there. I told him I'd take a look and if I found them I'll input it into the system and get him what he needs. I found what I needed and all was well. A similar thing happened the next month and I began dreading the first quarterly count. The cracks that had already shown got a lot bigger, but the CFO said to stay the course. The warehouse had accumulated a significant amount of overtime and now outgoing shipments were being delayed. The semi-annual arrived and we nearly had to shut down the whole plant because the warehouse wasn't getting anything out, but production never slowed, so we were running out of space to store anything. They pulled almost everybody from their office to help with the count, so almost nothing else was getting done. Me and the packaging purchaser handled all of the incoming items to help where we could, but the overtime for the warehouse tripled from the previous month. The day after the counts were due, a few people called in sick and many scheduled vacation around when they knew the annual was going to happen. A slow and painful death was preferable. Pretty much everybody in the plant was pissed off, complaining to every manager they could. Within a week the CFO instructed the warehouse that they were going back to their previous schedule and requirements. Me and packaging kept the new rules, which, whatever, and life returned to normal. I don't know what the full damage was or how things were going forward because I walked out one day in another MC story, but I hope the warehouse is happy. Story 3. Buy one get one for $1 but not that. Story 4. Play stupid games, win stupid prizes. Before I start, everyone needs to have some context. I work on ships as officer. Any merchant ship has 3 departments: deck, engine, and galley, cooking and housekeeping. I in this incident belong to deck department. This is the story of my first ship which I joined as a trainee cadet. On ship, chief officer, the second in command also holds the position of ship's training officer. Let's start. I was a newbie and even though I was a good student in my pre-sea training, nothing matters on board vessel. That's why we have to spend 18 months as trainees. I joined this oil tanker in Lagos, Nigeria. Ship was quite an old one and like any old equipment it had acquired its own quirks. For example, there was a valve which could not be operated from control room and crew had installed a hydraulic hand pump at valve's location which had to be pumped for that valve's operation. Similar issues were there all around the vessel, which meant that longer you spent time on that ship, more familiar you would get with its quirks. I was lucky as everyone in deck department, including 2 trainee cadets, were old hands and by my 3rd month I was well aware of ship's quirks. By 6th month, most of these old hands had signed off including old cadets and I was now the oldest one in department. That also meant that new crew signed on, latest one being the C/O who had signed on just 2 weeks after new cadets arrived on the vessel. Everyone, Reed Master aka Captain, expected me to familiarize the C/O with ship's unique quirks which I tried but somehow he thought I was trying to teach him his work. And he took my suggestions as an affront to his rank. In everything he tried to put me down. Even though I was the oldest trainee on board he would assign me lowest jobs, also he could teach the 2 new cadets, or so he claimed. I didn't mind that because the last C/O with whom I had a great rapport, still have, had already taught me most of the things, and these low-level jobs, clean oil cleaning control room, paperwork etc., allowed me to live a chilled life on board. But there were still some critical things that I was supposed to do, master's orders, one of which was making valves ready before operation, loading, discharging etc. These old hydraulic valves are operated via these thin pipes running from engine room, power pack motor, to valves. These thin pipes have hydraulic oil running through them at humongous pressure. These pipes have pin valves on them which are basically just screws, screw down, no oil will pass through them, screw up oil will pass through them to cargo valves which you can then operate from control room. It was my job to screw up those before operation. This job was critical because if you screw up too much the pressure of hydraulic oil will shoot those screws out like a catapult and there will be a big oil spill on deck. Additionally those screws were specialized pieces as newer vessels don't have that, therefore no spare screws, not even with company. This was the second operation under this of a C/O. Before operation I was going on deck with a screwdriver to prepare all the valves when the C/O caught hold of me. Shouted at me for no reason and told me that others need to learn and I was the one blocking growth of those new cadets. He ordered me to clean and take inventory of stores. I simply said okay sir, handed the screwdriver to one of the new cadets and made my way for some relaxation in storerooms. This was a ship-to-ship operation. Later in day we got alongside another ship for discharge operation. I went back to office as ordered and this C/O began operating valves from cargo control room. In no time there was a mayhem on deck, hydraulic oil everywhere. Oil spill is a big issue for us if it goes in ocean, everyone trying to control its flow. Ultimately engineers had to stop the power pack. And deck crew, even officers, were on deck cleaning up the oil while night. Apparently the new cadet literally screwed up too much and 3 screws shot up, they were never found. There were literally fountains of hydraulic oil on deck for some time. Consequences: ship had to cast off without operation because we didn't have spares, which I had told C/O but he didn't listen, and you can't discharge without controlling valves. It took 48 HRS for the screws to be fabricated and transported to ship. Ultimately operation was completed with a delay of more than 80 hours resulting in massive loss for owners/charterers, angry master, and screwed up C/O. Similar incidents happened quite a lot with that C/O from a kaput copier to wrong cargo readings. Anyway, I signed off a month later as my contract was up. Later on I found, that was the last sailing that C/O in that company. That's all for today. Please don't forget to like and subscribe.